In the 19th century, the sun never set on the British Empire, and Britannia was prepared to fight to maintain her global grip on power. Among those joining the ranks were volunteer soldiers from the Australian colonies, who saw it as their patriotic duty to serve the mother country, campaigning from the Crimea in the 1850s through to South Africa at the turn of the century. But the human cost was high. Veterans returned home physically and emotionally damaged and were often left to fend for themselves. They'd given their youth to empire. Now they were fighting old age. Hundreds of ageing veterans were destitute, living rough on the streets. Then came a call from an unexpected corner, demanding that something be done. In October 1911, a group of Sydney's wealthiest women gathered for an extraordinary meeting at Victoria Barracks. They were the social elite, but they were also women of action. They formed the British Empire League, led by the formidable Dame Emma Dixon, a leading philanthropist. But even these group of indomitable women could not have foreseen the importance of that very first meeting. It led to the creation of the organisation that we know today as RSL LifeCare. In 1885, Britannia was at the height of her powers. But London was half a world away, and the colony of New South Wales, fearing an attack from Russia, felt highly vulnerable. So this fort was built on Bear Island here in Botany Bay to defend Sydney's back door. Constructed with dodgy concrete, it was crumbling from the start. But this general sense of decay was somewhat offset by this very impressive battery of guns that would never be fired in anger. Well, of course, the Russians never did come. And by 1902, rapid advances in weapons technology had rendered this fort obsolete. Bear Island was decommissioned and lay unused and half forgotten for a decade, until it was determined that this ageing military installation would make a suitable retirement home for ageing, destitute war veterans. For the price of a peppercorn rent, Bear Island was reborn. On the 2nd of July 1912, at exactly 3:30 p.m, on this very spot, the Governor-General, Lord Denman, officially opened the War Veterans' Home. There was fierce competition for places here and a strict criteria as to who would be accepted. Only those men of sober, upstanding character need apply. Well, initially there were only 7 residents here, living in these converted ammunition magazines. They'd all served the British Empire before 1885. The youngest was Richard Errington, a 70-year-old veteran of the Abyssinian campaign. The others, they'd all seen action in India and even New Zealand's Maori Wars. The men were used to the familiar regimented rhythms of barracks life, and that's exactly what they got. Although there were no ranks, they wore navy blue uniforms, complete with brass buttons and peaked caps. Recreation came in the form of square bashing, parade ground drills, practicing for formal occasions, and the daily raising of the colours. Well, there wasn't a lot to do up here, so the veterans decided that they would install a pool table in this room. But there was one very big problem. This 18-tonne gun was in the way. Now, we're told that the old diggers, there weren't that many of them, remember, manhandled this out of the way and buried it here, where it remained forgotten and undetected right up until the 1980s. In the early years, the dozen or so men who lived here were effectively isolated on this rock. It was Captain Cook who rather appropriately named this place Bear Island. And there were few creature comforts for the veterans. The dormitories had no heating, there was no hot water. The toilets flushed straight into the sea. In the wintertime, the men would retire to bed at 5 o'clock in the afternoon in a bed to keep warm. It was a Spartan place, more in keeping with a prison than a retirement home. But even this simple life cost money, and there was a constant struggle to balance the books. By the 1930s, Bear Island faced its greatest threat, not from foreign invader, but financial meltdown. Australia was in the grip of the Great Depression. Donations had dried up, and many of those who'd helped establish the home had passed away. Australian society was in crisis. Life was tough enough without facing the additional burdens of carrying the physical and mental scars of war. Amid the Great Depression, there were now thousands of diggers on the streets. The ranks of the old 19th century warriors were swollen by huge numbers of younger veterans who'd survived the horrors of the First World War. It was a vast, homeless army of damaged men. It was clear that Bear Island could no longer cope with the huge numbers now requiring dignified, proper care. Australia needed to do better than it had in the past. But again, it wasn't the government that acted, others did. Step forward, Colonel William Wood. He was an influential and wealthy Scottish doctor with a social conscience. He was joined by an ex-gunner, Stephen Stack, who'd been wounded on the Somme. And they formed a committee known as Legacy Park. Now, Wood had a weekender up at Palm Beach, so he knew the area around nearby Narrabeen Lake extremely well, and he identified it as a possible site for a new, larger, purpose-built home. Together, Wood and Stack threw their considerable abilities and energy behind the scheme. The Depression finally eased, and support and funding for their cause grew. There were committee wrangles and bureaucratic skirmishes, but these obstacles were overcome. On Anzac Day 1939, the new home at Narrabeen opened to great fanfare. Eventually, these facilities would be desperately needed, as Australia was only months away from sliding into the abyss of yet another world war. Today, RSL LifeCare runs a vast, impressive infrastructure, providing homes for 4,500 residents. It's all such a far cry from the humble beginnings here at Bear Island, and the fortress, built for war, that instead became a sanctuary for so many old diggers to see out their last days in peace.